You're listening to the Artist Athlete Podcast, episode 85. This podcast is dedicated to Circus. It's a place for professionals in the industry to share their stories, viewpoints, and information, and a place for outsiders to get a sneak peek into this world. Hey friends, fans, and enemies. I'm Shannon McKenna. I'm the host of the Artist Athlete Podcast and the founder of theartistathlete.com. It's still summertime here in Montreal. I've got my bikini on every day, searching for a pool in this city where there's still social distancing. And at the same time, all summer long, I've been uploading to circustalk.com. That's right. All summer, Circus Talk has agreed to be a platform on which I can come to y'all and bring these amazing interviews every week. Circus Talk isn't just a place where I host my podcast. It's also an amazing resource for circus artists. Whether you want to know what's going on in the industry, including show reviews, panels with professionals talking about all sorts of subjects, or you want to post a job, you can go to circustalk.com and get all your circus needs met. Again, circustalk.com. Let's never get it twisted, though. Circus Talk doesn't pay me any money for this. They don't fund or produce this podcast. I do this with my amazing team, all by our little selves. And while people have reached out to me and wanted to buy advertising space, I think it's really important that this podcast stay funded by the community. And that is why I love patreon.com so much. Patreon is a site that allows artists to connect with people who love their art, or podcasters to connect with people who love their podcasts, and allows the lovers like you to give small amounts of money each month to help pay the costs of what it takes to create a podcast like the Artist Athlete Podcast. You can give as little as $1 a month, and every dollar goes into stepping up the levels on our equipment, creating really special episodes like a super exciting one we've got coming up that I'm not going to tell anything more about. And yeah, it's just a great place to be. Patreon.com/theartistathlete. Go sign up today. My guest today is Becky Truman. In 1988, Becky Truman launched Skinning the Cat, Circus of the Sky, the UK's first outdoor aerial theatre company, producing groundbreaking narrative and character-based shows. The company toured internationally until 2012, establishing a unique style, which brought together Rebecca's skills as a performer, costumier, rig designer, and artistic director. The company appeared in cabaret, circus, variete, pantomime, and corporate entertainments. It was an important part of the company's identity that it was an all-woman organization. Yeah. Skinning the Cat, which takes its name from a traditional trapeze move, is, by its inclusion in the Victoria and Albert Museum's permanent collection and in the National Circus Ives at the University of Sheffield, recognized as a forerunner of the contemporary circus movement. Becky has recently published Aerialist, The Colorful Life of a Trapeze Artist, a book about her career. Here's my interview with Becky Truman. Becky Truman, welcome to the Artist Athlete Podcast.
It's lovely to be here.
Can you introduce yourself and kind of talk a bit about who you are and what you do?
Okay, my name is Becky Truman, sometimes known as Rebecca Truman. I am an aerialist, artist, visual artist, who, I say aerialist, but I am now retired. I'm in my 50s. I founded, ran, performed in, was artistic director of a company called Skinning the Cat, which in the 80s, 90s and early thousands. You meant to say noughties, aren't you? We say noughties in England. I don't know what you say.
What is that?
I think it's because we say 80s, 90s, and then suddenly you can't say the thousands, so you say
zeros.
the zeros.
I think we say the aughts. I think that's something I've heard.
Well, there you go.
I don't know. I don't say anything. Anyway, I just say like 2005, but whatever.
That's when we were going, and we were an all women's company of about 7 people. We toured internationally. We worked across the board, really, in contemporary circus, traditional circus, variety shows, corporate, a bit of pantomime. Do you have pantomime in the US? I don't know if you do, but pantomime.
I don't know if I've ever been in conversation with a friend and been like, hey, you want to go see that cool pantomime show later? I don't know.
No.
So maybe not.
So we were known for partly that we were the first of this type in the UK. When the contemporary circus movement started, it was really just jugglers, and we were the first to do aerial in I don't know if you have that big contemporary and traditional split in the UK, which certainly was very strong at the time, and we were the first to do. The contemporary is really where you start using narrative and character based shows. And also...
Oh, interesting. So you define contemporary circus as having a narrative structure.
Yes, I don't know. How do you define it?
I was actually thinking about this a lot. I just think of it as any circus without animals.
No.
I kind of
it's different here.
But yeah, okay.
Okay. Yeah. So that's, it's character narrative based shows, and we were the first to do that in an aerial way. And
very cool.
Yeah, and we're very visual, because I was and am a visual artist as well as a performer. So
can we get into that a little bit? Like, because looking at your website, looking at your images, looking at all of that, like it has a very strong visual palette to it. Did the visual work start before the aerial work? How did...
Hand in hand. You have to kind of track back to my childhood, really, to see that.
Let's do it.
Go on then. I was a gymnast and an artist, no good at anything else at school. Really, really, sport and art I was passionate about both. And I had all sorts of different sports, but I got very good at gymnastics at school. But was always making things. And we were a very theatrical family. We were quite a big family and had our own theatre company that we involved the locals with. And I made the costumes and performed in it, a bit all round. And we grew up like that. And my parents were theatrical.
That's so cool.
That was my upbringing, but I was also doing the gymnastics, and I never thought of a way to put them together. You don't think about a career when you're that age. That's the two things I did to extreme. When I was 15, I quite suddenly, and I mean within a year, grew very tall. Actually very short for many years. People don't believe it now, because I was one of probably the shortest girl in our class at school, and then very suddenly grew. And that's no good for gymnastics, as I'm sure you knew. And it kind of went on the back burner for a bit, and I went to art college and really, didn't think too much that I could ever do anything else. But at the same time as going to art college, and again, hand in hand, sort of time-wise, I started performing my bizarre kind of costumey performances, and I really don't know what to call them, because I wouldn't dare to call myself a dancer. That would be rude to dancers. And I wasn't doing aerial yet. I was just prattling around on a stage, dressed up, would probably be the best way to put it. That's what I was doing, and trying out all different things. I really make very extreme costumes. You'll see from my website, all the characters are taken to the extreme. And while I was prattling around on the stage in my extreme character costumes, I started meeting other performers, and I met a trapeze artist who then started teaching me. And, we all know when you start aerial, you either are or you aren't. You're hooked, or you hate it, or it's too much. And I was completely hooked instantly. So then the costumes and the aerial went together. And that's what made Skinning the Cat really unusual, because I took those costumes to much more extremes than your average aerialist might, certainly in our time, because I could experiment with different shapes and different different ways. Protrusions would be the word I'd use. Normally, an aerial costume will be skin tight. You don't want things getting in the way, being dangerous. You want to be able to slide when you want to, hold when you want to. With my costumes, I found, now where can I have an extra bit that sticks out, and what can it be made of, and how can I change? I always wanted the human form to be different shapes. I used to think of it like shapes in the air. I don't like straight lines, and I think one of the things I loved about aerial is it's not like doing a painting where you've got a kind of border to it. It's in a frame. It's up in the air, and there's no boundaries to it.
That's so interesting that you say that, because looking at some of your work, you do kind of environmental, or I don't want to say site specific. It's like outside of a frame, you know, you're not framed by a stage or anything like that.
Exactly.
You have that.
And even it depends, because we worked indoors and outdoors, and even when you're indoors, a big top is not a frame, is it? Because you're working in the round, and even the air is kind of in a curve. There's not that. I mean, okay, we did work on stages as well, but I was never a fan of the proscenium arch, and I prefer things that aren't straight. I don't know why, I just do. So all my costumes are covered in curves and swirls, and
yeah, they have a very like Harlequin-esque nature about them to me. When I was looking through them, a lot of like the checker and the bright colors with the black and white, and these like larger than life shoulders or protrusions. Do you have any inspirations, or where did these kind of images and visuals come from?
I've had to think about that, because I now teach art students, and people are asking me these kind of things all the time. But at the time, I never stopped to think, ooh, I must do some research to get some inspiration for a new costume or a new set or prop or whatever. I think I am somebody that is overwhelmed with creative ideas. And I know that, I mean, it's not always good. It can be quite exhausting, and too much, and lead me to take on too many things and get me into all sorts of trouble. But they just happen all the time. Everything I see, I kind of collect. It's like I've got a library in my brain, and everything is collected there for, I don't know, I just store things. So shows or nature or characters in the street, absolutely anything. And when a show starts and you've got to design a costume for me or someone else, I'll just take that thing and probably make it more extreme. I like to make things as extreme as possible, and that can sometimes simply be the person that's going to wear the costume. So in some cases our costumes transferred between different characters, different performers, but in some cases where we had some very core members of the company, I would take their characters, circus people do tend to be quite strong characters, and I would exaggerate that in the costume and in my way.
Oh, interesting.
And I would take that person to the absolute extreme, and obviously it normally would have to be something they were happy with. I wouldn't kind of force them in a direction, but normally as I was kind of sewing, they'd go, oh yeah, great. So, and that's a nice way to work. And still now, sometimes I'm very fussy about who I make costumes now. I wouldn't call myself a full-time costumier, because it's my way or the highway, really. I'm not someone that wants to do it. If somebody said, oh, I want it like this and I want it like that, no, sorry. I'm happy to work with a brief, you know, it wants to be sort of in this colour scheme and it's for this occasion. So I'm happy to work within challenges and situations. It wants to be high or large, or it's got to be for this character. But then the actual how it develops, somebody has to know me and trust me. So I've got kind of key people that I work with that really I can't be over the top enough.
This is such an interesting aspect of collaboration that I've been thinking a lot about lately, is like, how much do you guide, or how much do you allow yourself to be guided? And how much do you have to listen to what's within and the vision of yourself?
I'm not sure that collaboration would probably be a completely fair description, because I'm a bit of a creative dictator. Cool. Now, I use the word collaboration when I sometimes work with other artists, but it's it's normally been my idea in the first place, or they'll want an idea and I'll come up with one, or I'll develop it, and it's very much has to be my style, and so it's not completely collaborative, and so but if I work now, if I work for somebody, for example, I have a company called Irregular Arts in Bradford who do sometimes cabaret, sometimes outdoor sort of spectacles, and they know that I will do them something completely extreme, and they come to me for that. They come to me because they like my style and it works, and they'll say, these are the guidelines, go for it, Becky. And I can't be mad enough for them, and I can
I
they never
love
say
that.
oh Becky, we love it, but could you just turn it down a bit, because that's never going to work. It's always, they're always happily surprised, because they say, well, whatever brief we give you, you'll do it more, and we're always pleased to see what you come up with. And that's how it has to be with me. I'm not someone that, I'm never going to get a job making period drama costumes or anything. It was sometimes a bit of a problem in Skinning the Cat, because Skinning the Cat was very much my company. It was made in the image of my designs and my format, and that there's a lot of me going on, isn't there? I hear, and that was what was working. That was what was selling, and all the company members that joined had an input. They'd have ideas, but it had to fit within that look. And so sometimes ideas, I'd say, no, sorry, that's not right for this company. Sure. You have to take that somewhere else, or start your own company or whatever. Every company has its thing, doesn't it? Its unique selling point, and the way it works. And Skinning the Cat, it was me and my way, I'm afraid.
Absolutely.
So, yeah.
What I'm thinking about though is, and I think it's really interesting I don't know why I keep going back to this definition of contemporary when speaking to you, because when I think about also very Montreal-based contemporary circus, it's all, like modern dance, black booty shorts, black tops. The costume budget is usually H&M, Forever 21. You go, you grab something, and then you go on stage. But for you, the visual palette and what, as you're saying, your selling point is the visuals. Yeah. So I'm interested in if you also take this to the content of actually what goes on stage. And by that, I mean the narrative structure of the piece. Who designs that? Is that you as well?
Hugely. Yes, it's absolutely affects. Again, I don't accept one without the other. Everything I do feeds into each other. So the classic example is one year I'd had an accident and was still on crutches, but stupidly, I realised with hindsight, still working in the air. I couldn't walk without the crutches, but if I cut a couple of particularly ankle stressful moves, I could get up the rope and do the show. So I was still working, but obviously the crutches did not look good to come on. So we made a whole show called Enchantress. It was based around kind of somebody that hobbled on, and we decorated the crutches. There was a kind of huge eyeball on the top of them, and I had fangs made, and a kind of enchantress costume. I hobbled on, left the crutches at the bottom of the rope, and off I went. So although I wouldn't have chosen to have the accident, practical things is a creative challenge. I'll find a way. And I like that. If I do work for someone else and they say, this is the practical situation, that could be as simple as it's got to fit in the truck.
Right.
Or, or the person's on crutches or whatever, I will find a way out of it. And I enjoy that challenge. And so and then that one character created the whole show, because then we wanted the Enchantress then had, if you see on the pictures on the website or whatever you're looking at, there's this silver tree. We wanted the rig to be fitting with the Enchantress. So again, we didn't want to just do it on a normal rig. The rig became a character in the show. As Skinning the Cat developed over the years, first we had quite a normal rig in the first year. And every year, I always want to make everything more creative. And every year I think, that could be like this. So it got to the stage where the rig was a tree. And the aerial could only be what could work on that tree. So you can't say, I'm sorry, I want to do swinging trapeze, because you couldn't swing on the tree. It was only spinning or static because of the nature of being a single upright with branches that sort of cantilever. rigging points. So that immediately makes the show something different, which is fine because that's another creative challenge that we can work some new routines for. So we had things spinning off all the ends and, it was so different. If an aerialist joined us and said, no, I simply have to be able to do my heel hang on a swinging trapeze, that wouldn't work. It has to be someone that could, I'd say, taking the swinging trapeze example, there was an artist that joined us that did that, and we put that in the show, not on the tree, but in the show. And there was a tail on the costume, and she had to work it into the routine because, quite a big, thick tail, not just not a little piece of string.
You gave a swinging trapeze artist a tail?
Yeah.
So you really are a creative dictator. Oh my gosh.
I'm downright nasty. So, and to keep it safe, but actually, if you have an extra part to your body that you're not used to, like a tail, you just have to work it into the routine. So you do your move, you move the tail, and it might be that there's a move that you can't do, then you have to cut it out. So you have to work with the costumes. There's no situation where, I can't possibly wear this costume, I can't do all my moves. Well, then we adapt the routine. That's the way it was.
You don't adapt the costume to the routine. No. You adapt the routine to the costume.
I wouldn't make something completely impossible. I'm not a real idiot, but I would make something that I knew that if you adapt, obviously, because I think my strength was being an aerialist and a costume designer.
Yeah.
I knew what I could get away with.
Yeah.
With a bit of adapting. Whereas somebody that was just a costume designer wouldn't dare do that, would they? Because an aerialist is always going to say, I'm sorry, I can't work with that tail in the way. I can't do my such and such. And the costume designer would have to chop it off. Whereas I would say, I'm sorry, but chop that move out. You can work with it. So yeah, like I say, a dictator, but to a level. I wouldn't say that, that I had to work with a lot of challenges. And like I say, one of the very most simple challenges is getting everything in the truck. It's got to come in and out. It's got to fit together. It's got to be durable. Things have got to be safe. So, you're working with huge challenges anyway, but I would take it as to the extreme as possible within those boundaries.
Yeah. It seems like in visual artists, often there's a attention to form. Like the visuals, the costumes, the rigging, all of this. And I'm curious about content. Again, like where does narrative structure come in? You kind of talked a little bit about how the boundary of having a crutch created a character and that created a show. Is it always like this, that your forms or the creative barriers that you come across then kind of channel into narrative? Or do you ever, or have a team skinning the cat or otherwise that sits down and is like, all right, we're going to write a show about a little boy who climbs an apple tree and then he goes into the sky and he meets a talking ceiling fan, and I don't know. But do you know what I'm on? Like, how does the actual content of the show, or where does that come from?
I'm just thinking of our last show, which was called Rubicon. That came from, the one time I've only ever been to America. I went to Sarasota. There was a place called Sailor Circus there. I don't know if you know it. And it's near the Ringlings Museum and all the retired circus people that live there, and it was fantastic. I met lots of great people. Anyway, my experience of being in America, and I met a clown.
I do have to say that I find it unfortunate that your only experience of being in America was Florida, but I'm glad that I'm glad that of Florida you found your way to Sarasota for sure.
Yeah. Florida's a bit of a weird place. Don't start me on that one. It's a different thing. But the people that I met there were great.
Absolutely.
Anyway. So this clown, whose name escapes me at this moment, told me about his act. It was to do with a bird in a cage, and it was so beautiful. I asked him if we could adapt that idea for our new show. So, yes, I kind of took that idea and used it for the show, but there was also just a huge amounts of practical things I wanted to do. By that time, I was really sick of rehashing the same old trapeze routines, and I wanted to get much more experimental aerially. So then the show had to fit around all sorts of sort of bizarre things. We had someone doing aerial inside an enormous balloon. We had, and obviously that had its limitations. The poor girl probably nearly died of asphyxiation.
Oh my God.
In fact, I'm going to have to tell you a funny story about that. She was right at the top of the show, and we had to get her into this huge balloon right at the last minute because obviously there was only so much oxygen in it. And so we'd be backstage, and sometimes the balloons, if it was not warm enough, the balloons would burst. And then the show would go up a few minutes late because we would have to start again and get her into another balloon. And then we'd have to get her onto this winch and winch her up into the air. So sometimes people, the audience, think, well, why is the show late? Well, it's because the balloons burst and we've got to start again. Yeah, so there was kind of...
Wait, so she's in an actual physical balloon?
Yeah. She's actually in a balloon.
How did you find a balloon that size?
I can't remember. We just shopped around.
Fair enough.
I mean, obviously it's a pretty special balloon,
Sure.
not an average, but big enough for a person to be in. She was quite small. I don't know if I would have fitted in it with my length. So there was, and we had a kind of aerial hammock with these two sort of, we called them the stretch twins in, that kind of almost looked like one person with all their different limbs, and you never saw the whole body because some of it was in the hammock. So I have these ideas and I want to fit them into the show. So although I'd had the creative idea, the gem of it from this artist in America I met, mm-hmm. I then had all these things I wanted to fit into it, and then it kind of ends up sort of getting wangled around. I mean, aerial shows are very simple narratives anyway, because you're not always speaking, though sometimes. I mean, we did actually have some speaking in that show, but it was a bit of a nightmare with microphones, and Aerial is a nightmare. But anyway, we did have a bit of speech, but it had to keep simple anyway. And in some shows, I think it was very, very more clear what was happening. In some shows, people interpreted it in slightly different ways from what we'd intended, but that didn't really matter. The gist of the show was clear. And it was always very visual. And we also had to work the show because sometimes we would be booked as a finale for an event, kind of before or after the fireworks. And people might only just be walking past. They might not even come to see the show, just to watch the whole show. So it's always got to be enormously visual at whatever stage you happen to arrive.
Right. It sounds like, and I mean this with the utmost amount of respect, but it sounds like what you've done is taken little Becky, Rebecca, who was prattling around in her costumes in art school, and built like a huge, large-scale company so you could prat around in costumes in the air.
Completely. Yes, you can say that without being rude.
Okay, good.
Absolutely. Prattling around with costumes in the air. Yeah.
Very, very cool.
You got it.
I'm interested. Okay, so what I find about visual design and that kind of creative flow is that you can have an idea and realize it very quickly. Maybe quickly is a relative term. And what I mean it relative to is to have an idea about a routine or a skill in the air and to execute that. My experience anyway of creating aerial work is that it takes sometimes not long, but much more time than if I'm sewing some fabric or making an installation in my house or something like that. I mean, I'm not doing things at the scale that you are, but I'm interested to know if there is a difference in your creative process when you're choreographing, making routines, doing physical art versus your visual work.
I would not say it was quick at all. I would say, if anything, it makes everything slower because you always have to rehearse your routines all the time anyway.
Right.
Because that's just the nature of it. So you'd end up with a routine and then you'd try it within the show and something wouldn't quite work and you'd have to change your bit of rigging or rework the costume so it worked, or, you're always toing and froing. Rehearsal time, the way it used to work is we'd tour in the summer, and then with the whole company, with our narrative-based show. And then what I call off-season, which is our winter, we would do variety show or corporate or pantomime or whatever. And that wasn't always the whole company doing the whole show. It might be me and my trapeze partner doing our act within something else, a variety show or something. So, and then we'd have a bit of time where I'd be kind of in the office a lot, sort of sorting things out and planning and stuff for the next season, the way it goes. And then and during all that time, we'd be rehearsing routines all the time. And then we'd get together for about a month before the tour started and put the actual show together. So it'd be like we'd be rehearsing it in bits separately sometimes, and I'd be kind of making costumes or getting props designed or whatever, and then we'd put it all together, and it would be the most exciting and stressful and mad month ever. Because nothing would go to plan. You'd think you had it all well worked out. Never. And at the same time, you're trying to get the trucks and the caravans and the rig and all the practical and the tour finished and, all that sort of stuff together. And you'd think one thing was going to work, and then suddenly the rig design would not quite work out. I mean, you can't force an aerial rig to be safe when it's not, can you? So I remember the first year we made the tree, the cantilever system didn't work in the first version, and we had to completely redo it. And it really eats into your rehearsal time if you've got something like that to work out. And then we made a kind of gaudy sort of cathedral rig one year, and when the trapeze swung on it, it was moving too much, and it, again, back to the drawing board a bit with the engineering. So if you're doing visuals as well, you're working with so many different things than just your aerial routines. And also we'd use unusual props. So you might be doing trapeze off the handlebar of a shopping trolley instead of a trapeze.
Yeah. So I have to ask you, sorry to interrupt, but when you're designing rigging, do you have an expert consulting with you on that?
Well, you have to remember this is not now, starting 80s, 90s, and whatever you call the noughties.
I like the aughts.
What did you call them? The zeros?
Sometimes, but I like the naughties.
the aughts. Yeah, I like it too. It's kind of naughty, isn't it? And when we first started, health and safety was almost non-existent. We just did what we knew was safe. You could get away with not necessarily proving it to anyone else. And then as the years went by, we got more and more people coming onto site and wanting certification and wanting this and wanting that. And also as my designs got more and more diverse, then, it got more complex, and I did start working with a structural engineer. But what's really interesting, since you've asked about that side of it, is that I was absolutely useless at anything mathematical at school. I mean, really, I can't make sense of a subtraction sum. That's how bad I am. I think I've never been tested, but some sort of dyslexia with numbers. And I
have that, actually. I have that.
Yeah,
it's called dyscalculia.
Weird. Yeah, that's the one. I'm sure I've got that, because I cannot even measure something. That's, it's that. It just doesn't make sense to me. Anything with a number in
same.
doesn't make sense. So considering that was that bad, you'd never expect me to be any good at this stuff. But for me, if it translates into a practical thing, something I can feel or visualize.
Yeah.
So once I knew about rigs and what happened if you swung or spun on them or hung or, how they moved, then I could work with an engineer who didn't understand that side of things except numerically, and we could work something out. So I found I could design rigs once I understood how the metal moved in the air and how it moves as you winch it up into the air, which is completely different from once it's tensioned up in the air. So all these kind of different things, once I'd done them, I really got it. And I became not an engineer properly, but a designer of rigs, which if my maths teacher at school would have known that, he would probably have a fit. And there was a structural engineer that then started doing drawings for us and stuff, but he just did what I said, really. Obviously there would be advice, or you needed thicker trussing, or, he gave advice, but really, but he'd do the calculations and put it on paper. But I'd see something on paper, it wouldn't make sense to me when he'd done it, but it would be something to show people when they came on site. The health and safety came and said, "Where's the certification?" And I could wave it at them, but it really didn't make sense to me. But the actual process of working with a rig did.
Gotcha.
And it's interesting, actually, because when I teach some students at the Bradford School of Art, and get a lot of students with dyslexia, because it's art and their minds are that type. And I really see this pressure young people are put under, I don't know about in your country, but in our country, to fit in with this. You've got to do maths, you've got to do English, you've got to do science, you've got to be able to do all these things. And they end up incredibly stressed because education does not recognise that there's different types of brains. And I know we do recognise dyslexia, but all they're trying to do is support you to fit into the current system. There's no recognition of different ways of thinking, and that creative minds often do think very differently. And I find that very annoying about our education system. I think it's unfair to the people that think differently and don't get it, because I remember my own experience, and I sat at school for years without a clue what was going on. I mean, it was a waste of an awful lot of time from what I can tell.
Personally, I kind of always did whatever I wanted, and sometimes I failed school and sometimes I did exceptionally well, but it had very little to do with school and more what I was interested in personally.
Yeah, sure.
I'm curious about this because you alluded to it in the book, but talking about, I mean, I don't think dyslexia is, I guess it would be categorized more as a learning disorder, disability than disability. Yeah, than a mental health issue. But you do allude in the book to some of the mental health journey of an artist. And I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about that, what that looks like.
Yeah. I mean, I wouldn't specifically link it to dyslexia, but I do see with some of my students that they can be linked. The stress of dyslexia can cause that. But with myself, yes, I wanted to talk about it in the book because it's part of life. It's been a part of my life. And actually, what happened in the book wouldn't have made sense if I hadn't have talked about it. And also, one thing that's just so awful about mental health issues is that everyone's still ashamed of them, even though it's not meant to be anymore. People aren't. And the only way that that's going to change is if people understand them. And I think the problem is that there's people that don't have mental health problems, and there's a lot of people that do, more than we're aware of, I'm sure, still stick to this pull yourself together, you're making it up, it's all in the mind, blah, blah, blah. And it may all be in the mind, but that doesn't mean it doesn't become physical and it isn't actually an illness that's come from the mind. The mind can be ill as well.
And how did you notice, or what did mental health struggles look like for you personally?
For me, it was very slow.
Okay.
Insidious, is that the word? When something creeps slowly into your life.
Yeah.
Not noticed, or at least not understood or taken any notice of by me for a long, long time. And so I couldn't really say, I know the triggers that really set it off, but I think it was slowly starting before that. And it started in my childhood with a couple of very traumatic things that happened in my childhood. Although I didn't have any mental health problems as a child, I can see now that those were things that were then caused triggers as an adult and made a difference. And what happened was we had a couple of very nasty accidents in skinning the cat, which put me under an awful lot of stress. And I never took the time to recognise that stress and to understood that I was in shock, and I continued working aerially, and that led to more and more problems, because if you go on the trapeze when your best friend and trapeze partner has fallen on her head within the last few weeks.
Oh my God.
It's not sensible, actually, I would say to anyone when things like that happen. But I really thought I was tough. I'd been brought up very stiff upper lip.
Yeah.
You know, by a very strong mother who had to, my dad died when we were young, and she had to bring up 4 of us on her own, and she had to keep a good, strong face to us little people. And so I copied her. And I think I shouldn't have done that. I should have taken time to, I am in shock, I need to take some time out, but I didn't recognise it at all. I mean, there's a lot of talk these days about PTSD, isn't there? At the time, I did not realise or think about it. I just thought, we've got to go off. We're booked to do a variety show. Off we go for 6 weeks. Well,
that's it. That's kind of the challenge of it, right? Is that, do you even have the time to sit down and process? Or,
no.
Like, where are the priorities when you're an artist and your well-being is based off of your income based on performing, and you have a traumatic experience performing? What do you do? Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's very hard. And I think one of the problems, and I don't know any way around it, but one of the problems with being in show business is the show must go on, and people have paid to buy tickets. You're on the poster. It's very hard to say, I'm sorry, I really am a bit concerned about my mental health. It's another thing if you've been hospitalized because you've broken your leg, it's very clear. You cannot climb up the rope with a broken leg if you're in hospital. But if you've just got some sort of, someone's had an accident, I'm not sure I feel quite right, but I might be okay, who really knows feeling. It's very hard to say that to someone and say, sorry, the booking's cancelled, we're not coming, because that's really going to mess them up big time, because you're part of their program and their publicity, and it's something that's very hard to deal with. So you tend to kind of think, I'll pull myself together.
Which is funny, like, as you're saying, like, but if it was a physical manifestation of injury, then it would be so obvious to everyone, and the booker would be in the same situation. They'd have to fill their programming, they'd have to give refunds, whatever. But because it's a physical, tangible thing that people see instead of mental health.
Yeah, there'd be no guilt or responsibility or question. Whereas if you rang up and said, look, someone's had an accident, I'm in a bad way, blah, blah, they would then say, oh, come on, I think we really need you, you'll be all right, we'll look after you, come on anyway, all that kind of stuff. And you'd end up feeling really bad and going anyway. And I actually had one person, I was in a show once, and it was just after an ankle operation. Someone said to us, because I'd had the ankle operation and I hadn't had enough healing time because we had this booking. I was starting to really struggle just being on the trapeze with the kind of pushing motion my ankle was making before it had healed properly, and I was starting to have some problems with that. And they said, but you're on the poster, people have paid money to see you, you've got to carry on. I was like, okay, right, I'll carry on, and it's a difficult position for everybody. But that's the problem I was listening to one of your podcasts about Soleil, and someone had worked with Soleil the other day, and they have people understudies. And I thought, oh, God, that would be nice to be in a company of the size and the scale where you could have an understudy. Whereas a lot of smaller companies, and especially in our company, I was the catcher, I had a solo spot, and people expected to see me in the show. It wasn't like Soleil where if one act was ill, you could probably put another act in just as good and people would be happy. It was about skinning the cat, and I was the hub of it. Rightly or wrongly, that's the way it was. And not good in certain situations, definitely. So it just slowly over the years, it crept in and it got worse and worse without me recognising it, or when I did recognise it, I just didn't know what to do. Again, if you've got a broken leg, you go and see a physio, you know, if you start to feel, I know I'm not feeling quite right, I'm starting to feel panicky, I can't sleep very well, I just, things aren't, I know it's not right. What do I do? Do I give up my life? Do I go and live on a mountain? Do I, what the hell do I do? And I just didn't know. So I just put my head down and carried on. So, and it wasn't the right decision for my health, definitely.
Isn't that interesting though? I feel like I hear this so often. Yeah, that the alternative to, like, if you don't feel right or feel well, the alternative must be to completely trash everything you've built or done up to that point and go farm or live on a mountain or bake bread in a Parisian cafe or whatever. I hear this all the time. So what did you do?
I just carried on.
Great.
I just carried on. In the long term, not good, because I had some times when I had to stop. But I stopped for a little bit. I mean, literally a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, whatever it took. And then I'd carry on again as soon as I possibly could. But it was when I stopped skinning the cat that it really got me. It was like huge breakdown. Absolutely. Because I think holding on and keeping going and then stopping, and something must happen in your head. Wham.
You have time to process.
Maybe that's it. Brains are very complicated.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think about it kind of as you can work on an injury for a while if you do your PT and if you are really diligent about getting physical adjustments and all of that. As a athlete, you can work through some of that. But the moment you stop, the moment you take a week, that's where the real pain sets in. And I think it's true of the brain as well.
True, yes.
How are you doing now? Are you okay?
Well, we're a lot of years later, and I'm older and wiser. I still know the signs, but I've talked about it. I understand now why it all happened, rather than just kind of keeping going and ignoring it.
And what are the signs for you? I'm kind of asking you to get specific just for the benefit of the audience. But if you don't want to share,
it's
of course.
Very, very physical for me. I know we're talking about mental health, but for me, if I had to be asked to define when extreme stress becomes a mental health problem, I would say when it starts physical symptoms. Because people say to me, "Oh, but I get really stressed too," and I just, I carry on. No, I'm not talking about extreme stress. I'm talking about when it starts to become physical and it stops you functioning, which is the way it works for me. And I'm sure other people have got other experiences, but that's the way it is for me. And the very first thing that happens is sleep goes. And then you can get like a feeling of electricity coursing through your body. You become very weak. Your legs actually can almost stop working. You stop eating. You stop being able to swallow. It is very physical.
Yeah.
And these things build up slowly.
And what do you do about it?
Well, I don't think it happens in that extreme to me anymore. Well, it doesn't. Partly I'm not trying to be a touring aerialist, and partly I've talked about it, I understand it, and I process some of the triggers that had made this happen. So I'm in a very different place, and my life isn't the same madness. I always do too much, and I wouldn't say I'm ever going to be someone that leads a kind of calm, laid back life, but I work in a different way in that now that I'm not in a show, in a key part of a show, if I start feeling overstressed and like I say, the first thing is my sleep goes, I will take some days out because I'm not headlining in a show where if I take some days out, everyone's going to freak out and say you can't.
Right.
So it's a different way of working. And I can pace myself. If I'm making a costume for someone, I can pace myself with it. And if somebody else asked me to make a costume at the same time, or I'm working on a circus project or something, I'll think, this is starting to get too much, actually. I'll say no. Or I'll pay someone in to come and help with some of the work on that. I'm more sensible, which maybe is the approach that normal people, which aren't like me, have always been. But I'm a bit of a driven person, and it took me a lot of years and a lot of pain to learn to be a bit more sensible. I also have a daughter now, and my first responsibility is to be able to look after her. So I can't behave like that anymore.
Yeah,
it wouldn't be fair.
Sure.
So, but it's completely different. If you're working not in a show, you can take the time to look after yourself. I think my problem was having those dreadful accidents and all the stress we had and being on the trapeze.
You alluded to the book, and I can't believe we didn't bring it up earlier, but
so
I might take this part of the interview and stick it in before because we keep being
it's all in the book. God, did I not mention that?
No, we've mentioned the book, but only you and I know what we're talking about because you were gracious enough to send me the book. It's beautiful. You wrote a book. Congratulations. Yes. Writing a book is hard. What inspired you to write the book? What's it called? What is it called?
It's called Aerialist. The Colourful Life of a Trapeze Artist. And there was no inspiration to write it because the inspiration had already happened. All it was is after I stopped doing Skinny and the Cat and after I finished having my large breakdown, people kept saying to me, because the stories of Skinny and the Cat were just so extreme and so bizarre and so according to other people, interesting and different, people kept saying, you've got to write this down, Becky. And I remember even in Skinning the Cat time, our administrator come back from tour and we'd laugh about things that had happened, some ridiculous, extreme, over-the-top situations we used to get ourselves into on tour, and some of the characters we used to meet or tour with. And Anne used to say to me, will you please write this down? And of course I didn't. I was too busy and didn't think of the future.
Right.
But when I stopped and people kept saying it to me, I thought, oh, I'll start writing it down. And I'm not a writer, so I didn't really know why I was doing it, but actually it just felt that I was full of all this stuff, and it would be good to write it down to almost kind of stop having to think, to be full of it. It was like a way of putting it on paper. It was kind of a compulsion to write it down rather than an inspiration. And that's what happened, really. And then I wrote it. The first draft was just, I got some funding from an organisation, National Endowment for Science, Technology and the Arts. And they just wanted it it was in, we had the Olympics here, and it was in that year. They wanted it kind of documented because I talk in the book about injuries and coming out of being an aerialist and how that affects your body and mentally and physically and everything. And they wanted that written about. So I wrote all that down. And then people kept saying, oh, we want to know why and how, and talk about your childhood and why, so I started writing all that down. And then it was in 2018, not very recently, it was the 250th anniversary of Circus, which we celebrated a lot in this country. And my friend who runs Bradford Literature Festival said, that because she's a writer, she'd read what I'd written. She said, that book, Becky, this is the moment to publish it. You missed this year and you've missed it. This is the year we're all going to be talking about Circus, and we'll publicise it in the Literature Festival, so do it. So I started raising some money and I did it. And that's when we launched it in the year of Circus. And just at the moment, because I was going to talk to you and I was hoping some people in America might like to buy it, I've been working on it as an ebook, because that's obviously going to be easier and cheaper than always posting it. So
well,
that's
I have listeners all over the world, and you can buy it on Amazon, yeah?
You can, but not in the US at the moment. I think the best way to buy it is through my website, skinningthecat.biz, because you can there's a PayPal link, and
oh, perfect.
I think it's only Amazon UK, because I tried to join Amazon America and they take so much money that it just wasn't worth it unless I'm going to sell an awful lot. I wasn't sure about that. So so I thought I'd wait and see. I think it's because it's not my country. They charge you a lot to sell abroad. And
I don't know about that. I don't sell on Amazon, but I'm pretty sure they charge everyone a lot for everything.
Yeah. So anyway, it's through my website. That's the best place, and fabulous. It's better for me anyway.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, go to the source, support the artist. I love it.
Yeah. So yes, and that's how it happened. And then I was very lucky to get introduced to you through someone that had bought it because they'd been recommended by an English aerialist, and now I've managed to meet you. So that's lovely.
Here we are. You're in museums too. Like, you're not just
Yes.
How did that happen? What's it like to be in a museum?
Well, it's a little bit weird, actually. I'll tell you a funny story about that, because the Victoria and Albert Museum, which is the hugest one in London, very prestigious, when I went to visit them, because somebody had told somebody about when was it? I'd done some work after Skinning the Cat finished. I'd put on an exhibition of costumes. I know where it was. It was my friends who run a circus that was touring in Brighton, and they said exhibit some costumes. And I had a kind of circus exhibition in a circus in the foyer of the Big Top. Cool. And I was there, and somebody from a friend of someone at the V&A Performing Arts section said, you've just got to go and see this woman's stuff. So she came along and talked to me, and they were very interested in archiving all my pictures and documents and Skinning the Cat stuff, and also having a costume in their exhibition. And so I went to visit their archive department, and what was funny is that I honestly don't think they've ever had anyone visit them before, because all their people are dead. And it was quite exciting for them. Everyone was like, oh,
a real artist
yeah,
in the
a
wild.
real
Wow.
life person, yeah, coming to visit us. So it's kind of weird being exhibited in museums when you're still alive, I guess. And I think it's because obviously it's very colourful sort of visual thing. People like to exhibit them. And also because we were forerunners of the contemporary circus movement in this country. The V&A only had very, very old-fashioned circus costumes, and they didn't have anything like this. So they wanted to kind of show that. And then, so that was how that happened. And then in the year of Circus, everybody wanted to exhibit because of the costumes being so visual. They were kind of, every museum that has a gallery, was having circus exhibitions, and lots of people wanted my costumes there, which was lovely. And I obviously, being me, I didn't just exhibit them on a dummy in a glass case. I don't like things in glass cases. That's square, isn't it? I wouldn't like that, would I? No. I put them on trapezes. We hung them on figures. I made figures for them to go on and in aerial positions and put them on trapezes, and I put a rig up and in some places and put the costume figures on the rig. And so it was very, very visual and large. So that was great. But
that's fabulous.
Yeah, that was it. Being in a museum as an archive thing, as someone that's my students go and visit it sometimes, and it's like I've become this kind of real old person because I'm archived in the National Circus and Fairground Archive and in the V&A Museum. So it's like I must be absolutely ancient because I'm in a museum, kind of covered in dust and croaking, So that it is a funny experience. Yes, it makes you into something else, really. It makes you into this kind of, that's how we did it in my day kind of person, which I am a bit now, actually. I do get a bit like that about young people these days.
Well, what I think it does, and what I think is so cool about the UK, when you put your work or other people's work in circus into a museum, I think it's super cool because it really elevates the art form.
Of course, yeah.
And I thank you for being a person who could elevate the art form. And in the US and other places, well, the US, I guess I can speak to more specifically, it's very difficult to get funding. It's very difficult to get any kind of credibility for the work because it doesn't have that connotation. It doesn't seem like something that would be in an actual museum, maybe a circus museum, maybe something small and specialized and kooky, but not in something like the V&A. So
right. Okay.
I think it's super cool.
Well, don't get the wrong idea. We're fighting all the time. We weren't a recognised art form in the UK for many, many years until I can't remember what year, but most of Skin in the Cat's lifetime, we were fighting to be an art form. We were called entertainment and not allowed to apply for arts funding. So it's been a long struggle, and I would still say we often treated as the joke thing, the like you say, cookie thing. It's not easy, and I think a lot of what splits traditional and contemporary circus a lot of the time, we have a lot of divisiveness going on in this country, is the fact that traditional circus very rarely will get funded because they're seen as entertainment, and the fact that everything contemporary circus is doing has come from the traditional circus, and the culture and all the skills that have built up all those years is not really recognised, and it keeps it's a bit divisive, really. Some people being able to get it and other people not. And in an ideal world, we'd like to get rid of that. And I would like not to have the labels contemporary and traditional or classic circus, whatever you call it. I'd like to see that disappear in this country, but I'm afraid it still hasn't.
You just gave me so much to think about. This like almost appropriative nature of contemporary circus that I'd never really framed it that way before.
And circus, whatever type of circus, is an art form, and I'd like to see it that there's just different styles and types of circus.
That's it.
Not it's contemporary or it's traditional, because that is so divisive, and it's always putting down the traditional as if, oh, well, it's not art. Well, it is art.
Absolutely.
It really, and it's everything we are doing now is taken from that. How can you say it's not art? I don't like it. I'd like to see that change, but it's been a long haul, and it's not as bad as it used to be, but it's still there.
Well, I know it makes me think, like in the US, when the National Endowment for the Arts was created in the US, the reason that they didn't list circus as a applicable art form for funding was that it was doing so well at the time.
Uh-huh.
This was like back, Depression era, when when the government actually cared about the people and wanted to fund more public projects. They saw circus as the thing that couldn't fail because it always filled seats. It was always had a huge audience. It always did very well. So they didn't include it in the National Endowment for the Arts in the US.
Right.
And then as film happened, as TV happened, as entertainment grew into this very technological thing, circus is now completely left in the dirt because not only is it not understood, but also it can't get the funding that dance and theater and all these other art forms can, because at one point it was the top player in the game. So in the US, historically, it's really interesting to kind of trace back those.
Something that interested me recently, I was working with a circus that I work with sometimes still, doing a project. I got involved in some, because we were trying to market a new type of show, I got involved with some marketing focus groups, and marketing isn't normally my department, but I found it actually very, very interesting, because talking to these focus groups, you really understood the different types of people and different ages and type of people that might go to a show and what they were wanting from it. And one group said to me, and it was the older, more cultured kind of group, said they wouldn't bother to go to a circus anymore because, and the phrase was she used, our circus needs a Met by its representation in the theatre. So they might go to a theatre production and it would have some kind of cute, oldie worldy representation of circus. That is how they wanted to see circus, in that old-fashioned way, kind of looking a bit gypsy and a bit kind of cute and oldie worldy, and that met their need. They don't actually need to go to the circus anymore, and I found that a bit sad, because I thought, so because we're representing it with the imagery other ways, they don't need the circus. The real circus will die because it's kind of represented. Come on, get off your butts. Go to the real circus.
I know, it's like, yeah, that's what I think is so interesting about marketing and focus groups and all of this is, like, I think the job of the artist is to show people what they didn't know they needed.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Brilliant. That is a brilliant phrase. Yeah.
Thank you. And in marketing and focus groups, all you're doing is collecting and kind of trying to figure out what people want and what they want to see and show them more of that. And that runs so counter to what we do as artists.
Yeah.
It's kind of going back to, like, it's actually to be the dictator is to have that vision and to be relentless in showing that.
Yeah.
And showing people what they need because they don't know.
Yes, because if I would have done market research for Skinning the Cat, I would have never started it because there was nothing like it. Nobody knew they wanted it. Yeah. But now people say, when they say Skinning the Cat, they said, yeah, everyone's doing aerial now. And you were the first, you were the first to do it like this. And
now you're in a museum.
Yeah, exactly. Now I'm collecting dust in a glass cabinet. So your market research it can be interesting, but it doesn't always work because people don't know about that thing that they need in their life.
Yeah.
Anyway,
I want to wrap up. It's been a bit of time. It's been so lovely talking to you. But my last question that I always give to all of my guests, Becky, I'll give it to you now. What advice would you give to yourself at the beginning of your career?
Yes, right. That's interesting because I thought about this because you wrote it on the email.
I always try to give people a bit of a warning.
Yes, and I've thought about it, and I think I've got very good advice to give myself, and I also know I would ignore it.
Fantastic.
Because I know myself so well. Because I'm stuck with myself.
Yeah.
My advice would be kinder to yourself. Remember that you're human. Give yourself space to, in the things we were talking about, to adjust to things and trauma and, look after your own emotions a bit. Don't always feel under this show must go on pressure. Be more assertive and say, my friend's had an accident in the company. I need the space to get over it. So be kinder. Don't try and do so much. Don't try and be everything. Don't try and have everything in that show absolutely perfect. Stop being such a perfectionist. It is okay if things aren't all sparkling and perfect every time. But like I say, I could say this to myself and I would ignore it. So that advice would fall on that stony ground, I can tell you.
Well, you can't say you didn't try.
Exactly. And I can't think what else to advise myself, because
Can you say that to students, like art students that you have now?
I do, because a lot of them come in and they're upset and they're stressed and it's all going wrong. And I always say, and actually this is a good bit of advice for myself, nothing is worth getting that upset and stressed about. Really, what is the worst that's going to happen? You're going to fail your degree, or you're going to disappoint somebody. Well, do you know what? So what? If you're so upset about it, let somebody else feel disappointed in you. That's their problem. And that I should have listened to, because I've lived my life trying to live up to this expectation, that booking, this, and I include my own expectations. And I don't think that that's always healthy. I know it can be brilliant because it means you achieve a lot. You're a high achiever. You can do amazing things. But I think I could have done that, but been a bit kinder as well. And I'd like to think that I might listen just a little bit, maybe a little bit.
Oh, I like that.
And I think even if young Becky didn't listen to that, I think the fact that I've experienced that and I'm able to say that to people I work with and also to my daughter, just to say, do you know what? Nothing is worth this stress. Let it go. I think that's helpful for them, even if I wouldn't have listened to it. How's that?
Oh, I love it. That's amazing. Becky, thank you so much for coming on the show. Skinningthecat.biz is the place to find you. We'll post all your links and everything in the show notes. So people will definitely want to see more of your work. So thank you so much for
inviting me. And I hope we meet again sometime when we're allowed in and out of each other's countries.
I know, for sure. That was my interview with Becky Truman. There were a lot of things I thought I wanted to say at the end of this interview, like as I was listening back to it and taking notes and kind of figuring out like how I wanted to summarize everything. I thought about kind of defining contemporary circus. I thought about, talking about mental health. But I think what strikes me the most about Becky is just how she's one of those types of artists that is so singularly focused on who she is and what she is making. And I have an immense amount of respect for that. I think sometimes I can get caught, and I watch other artists in the community get caught up in self-doubt or these thoughts of lack of inspiration or procrastination or these kind of evil little demons that can creep in and destroy our artistic impulses. And I'm sure we didn't talk about this in the interview. I'm sure Becky has them. But talking to her and listening to her and her confidence in her creative dictatorship, as I kind of dubbed it and we joked about, was so impressive and inspiring. And I hope you all gained some inspiration for that too. Like I said, Becky sent me her book and it is wonderful. And to my Patreons, I've already posted this, but I do want to purchase 2 copies and give them away on Patreon. So if you are Patreons of mine, patreon.com/theartistathlete, you can go there and figure out how to get your hands on a copy of Becky's book. If you are not a Patreon and you want to learn from this inspiring lady, read her story, her website is skinningthecat.biz. I want a .biz address. Like, it's so snazzy, like .biz. Yeah. Skinningthecat.biz is where you can buy it if you're in the UK. If you don't want to pay for shipping, you can also get it on Amazon Kindle. I know in the interview we talked a little bit less about getting it through Amazon, but Kindle is how she's decided to go about distribution. So skinningthecat.biz is the place to go. If you want to follow Becky on Instagram, she's Rebecca_Truman_. And as for me, for aerial training tips and inspiration, my website is theartistathlete.com. I'm on Instagram, _artist_athlete. I'm on Facebook. I'm on TikTok. And again, patreon.com/theartistathlete is the place to go if you want to throw a few bucks my way. Thanks for listening. I'll talk at you next week, friends, fans, and enemies. The Artist Athlete podcast is supported solely by donations from people like you. Here's what some of those people have to say.
Hi everyone, this is Allie Cooper, owner and coach at the Radical Movement Factory in Santa Cruz, California. I love supporting the Artist Athlete podcast and the amazing community Shannon has created here. I teach rope and fabric and have a circus conditioning app available on iTunes called Cirque Plus. You can follow me on Instagram at AllieCooper_, and if you find yourself in California, come say hi.
Hi, I'm Leah. I hate conditioning. So I created the ABCs of Fitness, a fun, full program of active flexibility, body weight, and cardio with personal daily check-ins to motivate you wherever you are and whatever discipline you do. Join our next 19-day check-in challenge and slide into my DMs on Instagram at ABCs of Fitness.
Aloha! My name is Beth Russell, and I live on the beautiful island of Maui, Hawaii. I am an aerial artist and movement instructor specializing in chakra yoga to keep me balanced and grounded. I play with silks, trapeze, lyra, rope, acro, aerial yoga and dance, slacklining, pole, bungee, and climbing. Really anything that goes up and allows me to explore 3D space. You can find my dedicated aerial page on Instagram at Maui Aerialist. If you find yourself coming to Maui, let's play.
Hey there, friends, fans, and enemies. This is Chris Alston, Patreon of the Artist Athlete podcast. Straps artist and lyra performer and acrobat out of Greenville, South Carolina. So if you're ever passing through, make sure to stop in and see me and my friends. We have a wonderful space and we'd love to see you.
Hi, my name is Erica Lee. I'm from St. Louis, Missouri, and I'm an aerialist. I teach performing arts to elementary school during the day and do pole and sling and rope by night. I really like the Artist Athlete podcast because it gives me a lot of circus goals to look forward to. It gives me a lot of insight on what's going on around the world in circus, and that's why I'm Patreon.
Hello all. Thank you for tuning in to the Artist Athlete podcast. I am Opal Schwartz from Minneapolis, Minnesota. If you're ever in the cities, feel free to stop by the Aviary Minneapolis. It's a great time. With that, I hope you all have a wonderful rest of your week, and goodbye.
Hey there, artists and athletes. This is Andy Smith, owner and artistic director at Saltaire Circus School in Jacksonville Beach, Florida. And I want to thank you for contributing to the Artist Athlete podcast. You ever find yourself down in Florida, come check us out. Whether you're an artist, athlete, or someone ordinary just looking to be extraordinary, we got a place for you.